Well, I'm sure you'll be sad to see the back of all those genealogies. 9 chapters in a row, I think, would get anybody excited, wouldn't it? But for a significant stretch now, we're going to be in the section of the book that is essentially history. Or at least, that is how it seems upon first appearance. But if you look a little closer, you will see that this is, in fact, history plus theology. And that makes for some truly fascinating reading. While the life of Saul spanned much of the book of 1 Samuel, Saul gets essentially 1 chapter here all to himself, as the chronicler retells the history of Israel. Why would he do that? Well, for the same reason that the eyewitness to the robbery doesn't tell the police officer all the details of his day, but just the pertinent ones to the particular situation that both of them are discussing together. Well, the writer here gives the biggest lesson we could learn from Saul's life, and you'll find it there in verse 13. You see here that this is not just history, it's history plus theology. Saul died because he was unfaithful to the Lord. That was why he died, not because he was weak in battle, not because the Philistines were so strong. No, he died because he was unfaithful to the God he ought to have served. You see? So, let's go back to the start of the chapter, and we'll see this sorry tale from the life of Saul one more time, but from this particular vantage point. So, we read about that massive battle between the Philistines and the Israelites, which took place at the end of the book of 1 Samuel. The Israelites fled before the Philistines, and many fell dead on Mount Gilboa. Saul is injured by an arrow, and he says to his armor-bearer, verse 4, "Draw your sword and run me through, or these uncircumcised fellows will come and abuse me." He knows that if he is a king taken captive, well, he will be tortured horrifically and made an example of. And so he wants someone to put him out of his misery. But his armor-bearer, this is the man who stands by his side and has extra kind of military supplies. He would even be a literal human shield if called for by the king. Well, he refuses to do this. And so we read, Saul took his own sword and fell upon it. When the armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he too fell on his sword and died. Which is an absolutely tragic end for the first ever king of Israel, given all the high hopes that the people had that this man would be a great deliverer and destroy their opponents and enemies. See how far he has fallen. What is noteworthy here is that he lost this battle, as we've already read, because he was unfaithful to the Lord. Saul had not repented of his great sin, and see, even at the end, how limited, how narrow his perspective was in the final moments of his life. He rightly understands, I have got to take serious action here if I want to avoid the misery of falling into the hands of my enemy. I am willing to do something drastic and costly if it will spare me that fate. But you see that even at the end, he didn't have an eternal perspective on his life. He didn't say, look, I am on my deathbed here. I have been injured by an arrow. This is it for me. I have got to do something drastic here, or I will face the eternal consequences of my sin. The drastic thing I've got to do is repent to the living God and ask him to forgive me of my many sins. He has breath in his body. He has presence of mind. He has a moment of grace given to him by God, whereby he might turn and be saved, but he turns all his attention to his earthly life. He speaks not to the living God, but to the guy standing next to him. He pleads with him, and his efforts are all entirely misplaced. Now, you might better look back on the story of Saul and remember at least 1 or 2 good things that Saul did. But the chronicler, he retells none of them to the people of Israel. Why? Well, because there is not a single lesson you need to learn more urgently than this. The most important thing in all the world is getting right with the living God by actually turning from your sin and truly putting your trust in him for forgiveness. If you do that, then whatever happens in life, you will know what will happen to you in death. You will open your eyes on the other side of death in an eternal paradise where you will endure no suffering and you will commit no sin and you will be guilty of no moral failure and where you need not fear. What a glorious prospect that is. You have a few short years down here on earth to come to terms with the fact that you cannot save yourself and you need Jesus to rescue you. Saul couldn't save himself physically. He certainly couldn't save himself spiritually. Though God warned him that this would happen if he went on in his unrepentant sin, Saul refused to listen. His stubborn rebellion cost him his life, and it certainly seems his soul as well. Saul is ultimately a cautionary tale of what not to do in this life. May God help us to learn the lessons that we ought to learn and freely, gladly, and wholeheartedly turn to the Lord our God in order that we might be saved.